Joining me to discuss the reaction to this report and how its recommendations may help counter terrorism and extremism is Tom Wilson of the Counter Extremism Group. Thank you very much, Tom. Great to have you in the studio as well. Were you surprised initially about the backlash to this report?
No, I think it was entirely predictable. We've seen in this country that there's been a concerted campaign to try and undermine counter-terrorism efforts, which is what PREVENT is part of. I don't think anyone's denying, least of all William Shawcross, the author of this report, that there's problems with PREVENT. But when you're calling to scrap our counter-radicalisation programme and you're not saying what you want to put in its place, I think people are going to question what your motives are for doing that.
Yes, indeed. And if what people are saying is that there are, which they are basically, there's racist undertones to this, it's disproportionately targeting the Muslim community at large and all of this stuff. Is it an attempt to try to cancel something that's designed to keep us safe and using that big racism banner in order to be able to do that, to silence people?
Well, I think many people will draw their own conclusions about what the motives are of people who don't want us to have a proper counter-terrorism programme. But it is the case that some of the people who are opposed to this programme have praised Jihadi John, supported, encouraged people to go on violent jihad overseas, that kind of thing. So I think people will question their motive. The racism claim about PREVENT has been there for a long time, and yet this independent review has happened, and far from finding that it is targeting Muslims, it's actually found that in some cases the programme is neglecting Islamist extremism and is probably disproportionately focusing on what it defines as far right.
Well, and this is quite an important point, OK, because the far right banner is something that absolutely shuts people off. And we had a chat earlier on, actually, about some of the protests that were taking place outside a Knowsley hotel, an asylum seeker hotel, yet again emphasising nobody condones violence, I don't condone violence, but saying that everyone who doesn't want to live next door to an asylum seeker hotel must be far right is an absolute shocker. And this definition of far right appears to be getting broader and broader and broader, doesn't it?
Yes, well, I mean, we're quite fortunate in this country that we have a very small far-right terrorist threat. It's there, it's not as big as it is in North America and Central Europe, but we have that as a smaller threat. The whole point of PREVENT is not that it's supposed to target anyone with, I don't know, unpleasant views. It's supposed to make sure people don't become radicalised into terrorism. So when you see headlines such as we had over the weekend that Jacob Rees-Mogg was included in PREVENT monitoring and analysis, you have to question, what are they defining as far right?
Did they give any explanation for that? Because, to be honest with you, that just sounds... I mean, I've met Jacob numerous times. The idea that he would be included in something like that is pretty laughable.
Yeah, I think that what they were trying to do at the Home Office was they knew that they had to write a certain number of reports about Islamist terrorism, and then they realised we want to be even-handed, so we better do a load on the far right as well. They search around and look for things that they can monitor, and they started monitoring people on Twitter who were who they described as being patriotic, and said that... Yes.
Now, that's an important one, because that's my concern, is that patriotism is now just being called far right.
Right, well, they've identified a group of Twitter users who they called patriotic and proud, and they said that Jacob Rees-Mogg was among the people who were popular with this cohort. So it's a really tenuous link to what this has to do with far-right terrorism. What William Shawcross's report does is it says, let's get PREVENT back to focusing on terrorism, not every group of person who might have a controversial opinion.
What would you say to people? Let me just ask this question. What would you say to people who do legitimately believe... I mean, I had an imam on last week, actually, who said that he felt as though the PREVENT programme was against all Muslims.
Well, I would challenge somebody like that to demonstrate how it's against all Muslims. I think that by targeting the most extreme elements of a movement, you actually do everyone else in that group and that community a favour, especially because Islamist terrorists don't just blow up non-Muslims. Often they target other Muslims who disagree with them. I mean, there are so many Muslims who work in PREVENT and who work in counter-extremism. I think it's ridiculous to suggest that it's an anti-Muslim programme. Yeah,
indeed. Just finally, just kind of slightly return to something we were talking about a little bit earlier on there, which is that playing the tape forward a bit, right? So playing the tape forward a bit to slightly younger generations who are coming through now. This idea of patriotism, being proud to be British, whatever that even really means, you know, do you think that there's going to be less of that? My concern is that reports like this or comments like this would insinuate that actually not only do we not have anything worth protecting, but if you want to protect it, there's probably something wrong with you as well.
Well, that's an interesting idea. What Prevent's supposed to do is it's supposed to promote British values in schools, for instance. So you would hope that would encourage for a future generation to be really proud of what we've built in this country as a democracy and a free society. And the whole point about the kind of people that Prevent is supposed to be going after are the people who hate a free society like ours. So I would hope that for many young people, they would see that and it would increase
and
patriotism.
yet it's identifying people as, quotes, patriotic and proud, and potentially
as in some way a problem.
As a problem.
It looks as though that's what some people within Prevent have been doing, yes.
Well, it's fascinating stuff, and thank you very, very much. And that is Tom Wilson there of the Counter Extremism Group. OK.